Hey guys, this is Shelby with the Rogers Public Library. So this week for Full Steam Ahead, I want to talk to you guys about fossils. So fossils are kind of the preserved remains or evidence of organisms that lived a long time ago. There's kind of an arbitrary cutoff for fossils that are organisms that lived over 10,000 years ago. So they're preserved remains since then, right? You know, there's like Egyptian mummies that are a couple thousand years old, but they're not considered fossils. And part of the reason for that is because of the processes that make fossils take a really, really long time. They happen on geologic time scale, over thousands and thousands and even millions of years sometimes. Right? So fossils are mainly formed when things die and then get buried under dirt, right? So you have like a dinosaur that it dies and then a volcano erupts and ash goes all over it. Then its bones and its tissue are going to be protected from the environment. They're not going to get eaten by anything. And over time, there are processes that happen. One thing to note about this is if you think about it, you have a big pile of dirt, right? Like this is a pile of flour. And you have a fossil here and you have a fossil here. Well, you know that there had to be dirt down here before you had dirt up here, right? And so there's going to be layers of fossils and layers of different kinds of rock. And the fossils that are lowest down, they're going to be the ones that are the oldest, right? And so we can use rock strata, right, in the location of fossils to know which organisms lived first and which organisms lived at the same time together. And that's pretty cool because it helps us. It helped us figure out evolution really well. But right, so but all fossils, they kind of get made the same way, right? They get buried, right? So if you have like a bone like this and it gets covered in dirt, then what will happen, right, is in case of things like dinosaur bones or like petrified wood, is that right the bones get buried and then water seeps in, right? Really not like the kind of water that we drink, but like water with a bunch of like minerals dissolved in it, like calcium carbonate. And then the water seeps in and then it evaporates, but it leaves behind these minerals too. And so you get like, right, it's almost like it turns into a mineral, like or rock. But that's not the only form of fossil that forms this, right? Too, you can also get things called casts and molds, right? So they're like impressions, right? So if you have like a really soft stone, then it gets pressed in and it leaves kind of an impression even after the bone goes away or the branch goes away later on. And then these can be filled, these impressions or molds can be filled with other types of rock and create a cast naturally. But then other times we can make casts, kind of like humans can make them after the fact, using things like cement or plaster of Paris, which is the material that walls and houses are made out of. And these aren't real fossils. These are fossils that I made using Salto. So it's just kind of like a generic dinosaur bone. This is a branch. This is a grapevine. And this is a kitty paw print. But Salto is pretty easy to make. The recipe is 2 parts flour, 1 part water, 1 part salt. And you can scale that up. So I'm using this scoop. I don't even know how big it is because it doesn't matter, but I think it's about a quarter cup. And I've already measured out my salt. So I'm going to open the flour. And then another scoop of water. Right. And so this is it's basically Play-Doh, a really similar texture and consistency. And you can add like food dyes and stuff if you want it to be different colors. Or you can paint it after the fact. If you let it dry out like I did, you can paint it with just acrylic paints. All right, let's see. And right, and so we got this really nice dough. So the reason that we add so much salt to it is because it's antimicrobial, right? Adding salt makes it so the dough won't go bad right away. It's going to protect it from bacteria and stuff like that. So that means that you don't have to use it right away. I put some in a bag, and it kept for about 2 weeks at room temperature before it started getting stinky and gross. So you don't have to use it right away. But, you know, as long as you keep it in an airtight container so it doesn't dry out. And as for drying out, that takes about, it can vary. I think this one took about 5 days to dry out, and that was the longest. These other ones, there's like 3 to 4 each. And if you get it in a good shape like this, it does have a really nice Play-Doh-like consistency. You can make fossils like these either just by forming them, like this guy, or you can make like an impression with your thumb or with a cat's paw or something like that. Okay. And of course, you can make things that aren't related to fossils at all with Salto. Right. One thing to point out is that if you have a fossil like this, like a track, an animal print, they're not really the same type of fossil as, say, one that's of like a dinosaur skull, right? You have one that's like the actual organism, and one is just a trace of the organism, right, of their activity. And these are called trace fossils because of that. So they're saying like paw prints or coprolites are fossils of droppings, right? And it tells us what the animal ate, what their diet was like, but it's not actually a part of the organism itself. Yeah. So this is one type of fossil, right? These ones that are made out of rock and stone, they get mineralized. But there's another type of fossil too. They're called amber, right? So amber is fossilized tree resin, right? So you ever touch like a pine tree and it's sticky to the touch? That's the resin in the tree. And just like bones can be preserved under soil, so can sap, right? So it can harden. And if it's in an environment like buried, where there's not a lot of oxygen and there's not a lot of bacteria and things that are going to decompose it, it can harden completely and last millions and millions of years. But the cool thing about amber in particular is that it's not just that it's really old tree resin, but that things can get trapped in it, right? So you can, there's like old amber with things like mosquitoes or even sometimes bigger animals like lizards in them. And these fossils are called lagerstätten. And that's just like kind of a blanket term for really well preserved fossils, right? They have soft tissue, right? So they have things like muscles and organs that aren't preserved normally by fossilization processes. And if you have something like this isn't actually amber, right? This is made out of acrylic, a plasticky thing doing the same thing that amber does naturally, just artificially. It's made out of like oil. Right? But if you have one of these, you can examine the bugs in it using things like a microscope or a magnifying glass. For this one in particular, there's a lot of scratches on the acrylic, right? It gets scratched up really easily. So it's actually pretty hard to see in super close detail with the microscope, right? Because instead of seeing the bugs, all you see is the scratches. They just get magnified by so much. And there are things that you can do to try to smooth out the acrylic. I tried to sand this one. It didn't really work. It just made it worse. So, you know, if it is scratched up, you're probably better off not trying to smooth it out by yourself. One thing about amber and the organisms that are preserved in it is you might remember stuff like the movie Jurassic Park or Jurassic World or the Pokemon video games where you can take amber and it gets turned into living organisms. And that's not right. And so that's not something that can really happen in real life. And that's because for one, DNA it's delicate, right? It has a it starts decomposing when an organism dies, right? So DNA, I think it has a half-life of like 526 years, something around that time, a little over 500 years. And at that point, right, and so after that many years, only half of the DNA in an organism is readable, if it is preserved at all, if it doesn't just get eaten or something. And then there's kind of like a hard limit on reading DNA. It's about 1.6 million years. That's the oldest DNA that we've ever read, or in using modern DNA sequencing techniques. And dinosaurs died like 66 million years ago. So we can't, even if we had really well preserved dinosaur DNA from a piece of amber or something, it would be too old to really be readable. But there's another Pokemon fossil that I want to talk to you guys about, and this one is Archaeops, right? So the thing that's cool about him is not the whole bringing things back to life from amber, but that he's based on a real life fossil that's really important. It's called Archaeopteryx. So this was what's called a transitional fossil, and it has elements of organisms of different kinds of organisms, right? It's kind of a missing link in an evolutionary chain. So it has characteristics of birds, but it also has characteristics of dinosaurs. And so it's a really important piece of the evidence that we have for understanding dinosaurs' evolutions and the links between dinosaurs and birds. And it's pretty cool that there's a Pokemon based on that. And that despite the whole raising animals from the dead using DNA sequencing, there is some actual sciencey stuff going on there as well. But that's what I had for you guys today. I hope you have fun. I'll see you next week.